Periodization has never been required for maximum strength. And when I say that, I mean that periodization has never been required to literally break world records in powerlifting, weightlifting, any of those things, right? It is not a requirement. And many people have avoided any sort of periodization, and still been the greatest in the world in a given weight class or whatever, or of all time. So here's the thing. Periodization is largely built around, number one, just dealing with boredom in your lifters, right? It's just a systematic way of getting around boredom, or oftentimes a systematic way of trying to convince your lifters that you know what you're doing. And essentially what a lot of it is, and a lot of programming protocols are just there until your lifter gets bigger. They're a distraction. So in other words, if a lifter will simply listen to what a coach says, okay, and I want to be clear, and not cry, not whine, not say, oh, my progress is too slow, I'm not getting PRs, I'm stuck, right? If they just quit doing that and just simply do what their coach said, all they have to do is keep getting bigger, right? They just have to keep doing enough work, whether it's assistance work, accessory work, to continue to hypertrophy the muscles and do some heavy lifting. And that could literally include nothing more than training maxes. And in other words, a coach could have you come in and do approximately 90% of your max for perfect singles. People say, how many? One single, right? Come in, do relatively heavy singles, close to that 90% range. For really advanced lifters, it could be anything above about 85%, right? It could be anything above that, and not care about the progress on it, and just lift the weight their coach tells them to lift, and just spend more months getting bigger, doing all their various hypertrophy work, whatever it takes to get bigger, gain muscle, improve body composition. And they will get about as strong as they can possibly get. All right, the problem is, and this is one reason a lot of coaches have devised this, is because lifters get impatient, they think that they need to be seeing progress all the time. So a lot of periodization, or even things like 5-3-1, perfect example, has been developed so that they're always doing something that feels hard, and to where they see progress all the time. In other words, since 3 weeks in a row you add weight on a wave, I got stronger every single week. I added more weight. Okay. And then they reset, and if everything went well, particularly if you kept on really serious training matches to calculate off of, you can increase it each time, and the lifter is happy psychologically. Now, does anyone really think that there was anything special to doing, that 5-3-1 at those percentages of a training max and then stopping one rep short of failure? Does anyone actually think? I hope you don't think that there's anything special about that, or that it does anything at all in magic in the numbers and the programming. No. It just lets you do some heavy lifting on a big lift. It might help neural drive a little, especially the third week each time. And then the powerlifting version's the same thing. And then a bunch of hypertrophy work to gain muscle. What it does, it lets the lifter think that they're doing something special on the programming. Oh, and then they see that progression. If you cut all the accessory work out, if they're a pretty advanced lifter, they're going to get weaker doing that. It's the accessory work. It's the total training volume and the hypertrophy work that made them stronger. That's what raises the strength ceiling. The problem is a lot of lifters, unless they see it, they don't buy in. So essentially, a lot of programming and a lot of periodization is nothing more than smoke and mirrors. It's a trick because your lifters don't understand training. Okay? And I need to be clear there. The average lifter doesn't understand training. They don't understand that relatively heavy sets or singles can improve neural drive, and that they just need to keep getting bigger. Now, I've written some pretty complex programming, and I'm very familiar with all the forms of periodization and theory behind each one, and I'm telling people this is true. None of it's based on reality. Like there's nothing scientific, there's no evidence to any of this. There's not even a good biological chain of logic to it half the time. It's psychological. Okay? Almost all programming and periodization is psychological. It's there for the mental benefit of the lifter. And then when you remove all the smoke and mirrors, all it comes down to is, are you doing a little bit of heavy lifting, enough to peak your strength? Okay. And this is even when we start talking about things that are not linear periodization, stuff that's really not periodization at all, conjugate and things. There's some practice work with the speed work. Speed work is deloaded practice work done with high work density. Now, we could argue about rates of force production and all of that with it, sure. But that's not where the magic is. That's a little bit of the voodoo, and it probably really only counts if you do speed-based sports. I mean, boxing, there's a perfect example, right? The beauty of that is that it gives you practice. Tons of first reps, right? So you're setting up, walking out, setting up on a bench, unracking it, setting up on a squat, unracking it, right? Getting a practice of a first rep in over and over and over. And then you have the heavy days, which is where we get the neural drive. And they just avoid injury because we're doing deloaded maxes, right? So they can get away with maxes instead of doing 90%. But if you come over and just remove all that and say, how about we just do some 90% maxes and then focus everything else on getting really big, you'll reach your strength potential. The problem is it's too simple. It's too simple. And the average lifter cannot get their head around that fact. And they'll mess it up, right? Because that need to always see that progress, they'll mess up the training maxes. And they'll start missing them. They'll start grinding them. They'll go heavier than the coach says. Or if they're picking their own, they'll go too heavy, invariably. Okay? Instead of just saying, maybe I should do 10 to 15 sets of hypertrophy every week and just hit some nice, just heavy enough training maxes to get the high neural drive, which is around 90%, 91%, something like that. Which we know works with perfect technique. But then they're not hitting the PRs. They're not seeing everything get stronger every time. And they can't live with it. The ego won't allow it. Right? So that is why these sort of training systems have to exist. To appease the ego and the boredom and the impatience of lifters. That's it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys next time.